Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros Masterclass on territory and quota planning for Chameleons, sponsored by the team at Varicent. Really excited to have Martin Fleming back. We're going to give everybody just a minute to get settled in here. Martin, as you know, we love to learn a little bit more about our panelists before we jump into the meat of the content. Any big travel plans coming up now that the world is starting to open up a little bit?
Well, actually, fortunately enough, the end of next week, we'll be headed back to visit family in Boston for the first time in 15 months. Like everybody else, we've all been isolated, quarantined, and locked down. So it'll be great to see my son, daughter-in-law, and their daughter, and other family members. So we're looking forward to that.
That sounds like that'll be a great trip. And then you're in the Chicago area normally, right?
Yeah, we live in the suburbs of Chicago. That's right.
Perfect. And then anywhere you're excited to go out to eat finally, now that stuff's starting to open up, any restaurant or just, hey, we're not eating in the kitchen anymore, excited to get out of the house?
No, actually, we've already been out to dinner a few times. My wife and I were out to dinner a couple of weeks ago, and yesterday, as it turns out, well, the other piece of background, we relocated to Chicago to be with my daughter, son-in-law, and their kids. One of their sons had his 6th birthday yesterday, so we had to go to his favorite restaurant last night. So that not only do we have adults choosing restaurants, we now have kids choosing restaurants as a result of the pandemic.
It's good. We'll just have to remember how good that feels right now, just being able to get out of the house. And then in 6 months when we're like, no, I don't want to pick, you pick. It's going to be exciting. Folks, we got a lot to cover here today, so we're going to jump into it. As I mentioned at the outset, today's session is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. So those are people that are in sales management roles, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to help our community members answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own and see around corners they may not know are coming. We do that through bringing amazing presenters and amazing content like what Martin's going to go through today. We do that through a very robust and active online community forum. And in the future, we're really excited to get back to our in-person events. Great opportunity to meet some folks, learn some things, and have a great time. Everything we do is free for our community members. And for those of you who aren't, you will be invited to join shortly afterwards. And if you enjoy today's content, we actually have a very big event coming up in July. We have our quarterly Revenue Excellence Summits. And our Revenue Excellence Summit really takes a concept and explores it end to end with all kinds of speakers, panelists, and noteworthy guests. In July, we're going to be talking about moving from a function out go-to-market motion to a customer in go-to-market motion. Kind of cheekily, the funnel is dead. So if you're interested and you enjoy the program with Martin today, please do join us in July for even more amazing content. But enough about Modern Sales Pros and enough about what we've got going on. I want to hand it off to Martin for just a few words about Varicent. Martin?
So as I think many of our guests in the audience today will know, Varicent focuses on bringing technology and automation to sales performance management, all the way from lead to revenue generation, territory quota planning, all the way through in sales compensation management. The most exciting part of the work at Varicent now is the focus that we're putting on introducing new capabilities around machine learning and artificial intelligence to be a bit more predictive and analytic around what's coming, and that's really what has excited me about the opportunity to focus on the work at Varicent.
That's awesome. And Martin, we're always excited to have you join us and excited to work with Varicent. The content that we put on is always awesome. But Martin, let's learn a little bit more about you. I think one of the great parts about working with you is you've got a really unique title and a really unique perspective that you bring to this problem space.
Yeah, so currently I spend a fair amount of my time working with my colleagues at Varicent. I also am a research fellow at the Productivity Institute, which is a UK organization funded by the UK government's consortium of 10 universities, looking at and understanding how technology, productivity, and labor markets come together. And with the experience that I've had over a couple of decades at IBM, being able to bring together the technology as well as the impact and the benefits that technology is having and can have, both for firms and more broadly across the global economy.
It's exciting perspective, and excited to have you here. Every time we have you on, it's always such a robust conversation. And folks, just a few housekeeping notes before we jump into it today. First and foremost, the recording will be made available. This recording will live on Modern Sales Pro's YouTube channel. Probably be up there late today or early on Monday. Everybody who's here and everybody who registered will get a copy of the recording as well. And then in addition to that, Martin's going to be putting, we got a lot to cover here. If you have questions, please do use the question answer panel. That's going to give us the easiest access to make sure that I can tee Martin up appropriately. The team at Varicent may follow up with you afterwards. If it's a great question, you could have a conversation with Martin about this. But with that, Martin, you ready to chat about what we're going to chat about?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. So when Martin and I were brainstorming about territory planning and quota for Chameleons, we came up with a couple topics, and we're going to go through these largely in order today. And our first is kind of taking a step back and saying, how do I actually establish a culture of leadership and decision-making for the team that's going to be building territories, designing quotas, and really planning that? The second piece we're going to jump into is, as we scale our team, that may be completely remote now. We may have gone fully remote. How do I adjust and account for that when I'm territory planning? When we think about quota planning, we all went through an amazing transition over the past 18 months or 15 months, whatever it is. Having a robust quota planning process is helpful, but also, how do you account for quota planning in uncertain times? And then lastly, we're going to talk about how your tech stack can really help create and support the different best practices that Martin's going to talk about here today. So with that, let's just hop into it. Martin, let's start by starting. How do I kind of get started? How do I look at success? How do I create a culture of leadership and decision-making around territory and quota planning? What are some first principles that you've seen work really, really well?
Well, let's start with the word culture in your question. Culture is often defined as what you do when no one's looking. And that is the behaviors, the practices, and it applies to our own personal lives as well as business life, but the behaviors and the practices that we've had oftentimes for many, many years. And certainly the sales function is one place where we've had, similar practices over a long extended period of time. And there's always a feeling that I've been a successful sales person, and now I'm a successful sales leader. Why do I need to change now? I've achieved success in my career. No need to change. Well, the answer is that we now have tools and capabilities that allow us to be more successful and to allow the organizations we represent to be more successful. So it's the growth of sales leadership, C-level executive, C-level leadership that really are beginning to focus in the space where we can achieve even greater advances.
And it seems like when we think about, some first principles around territory and quota planning, having a great culture always helps, but it feels like one of the pieces are creating equally economically viable opportunity for the sales team, and also doing it in a way that's going to be responsible for the business. So you're not blowing up the operating model. How do you think about that? Is that the right kind of first principle to take with these?
Well, certainly in terms of territory planning, absolutely. Territory planning is really about deciding which clients do we want to make an investment in. Most organizations, business organizations, independent of their size, make a very substantial investment in their sales function, their sales capability. And it's a capital investment. If you're a CFO, you think of it as a capital investment, which if we're not making that investment in the sales organization, we're going to put it into product development or research or expanding facilities. So the sales function has to be able to be productive and generate a return. So knowing which customers we want to continue to build and deepen relationships with, which customers we want to invest and grow relationships with, that's the, if you will, to use your term, the first principle of territory planning, being able to prioritize where we think we can make customer investments and have them generate the kind of return, both for the salesperson who's looking to generate an income and build a new swimming pool in their backyard or a new boat, as well as the organization they represent for their financial success. So it's all around prioritization.
Oh, and I think, as we're about halfway through the year now, is now the right time for folks to evaluate and maybe evolve some of the things that they've done in the first half of the year?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's certainly now is a good time as we think about moving through the second half of the year and move into 2022, when perhaps getting through the pandemic for much of the world, a bit more usual, or shall we say normal business conditions might apply. But perhaps more importantly, I would say, you use the word evaluate. I suspect that many sales organizations don't do enough evaluation of their territories, of their quotas, how effective they are, how effective they've been. Again, in the context of the investment being made, how do we evaluate not only the individual, there's a lot of focus on individual sellers. We're going to hire or fire or change or switch, but it's not just the individual sellers, it's the entire broad layout of territories and quotas and how successful they're being in terms of generating what's necessary to sustain the business.
And when you say, just from back to kind of some of the first principles thinking, I think that may be a new concept for folks. Hold on, like we have to evaluate. I don't just, it's $1.2 million. It's always been $1.2 million.
Right.
Is there a frequency that you would recommend to folks to evaluate quotas? Is it yearly? Is quotas and territories? Is it half yearly? Is it yearly? Is there maybe a one size fits all, or does it depend?
Yeah, it does depend a bit. Certainly in part, it's a function of sales cycle. For organizations that have very large sales cycles, of course, evaluation will occur less frequently. Conversely, for organizations that have short sales cycles, it can happen more frequently. I think for the most part, we're thinking on an annual basis, whether it's business to consumer, business to business. For the most part, we're looking on a sort of a rotating 12-month basis, maybe a bit of an assessment at the halfway point, but it's probably something that's an annual evaluation of the investment that's being made and the payoff that's being generated.
Okay, I think that's there's a lot there, and I think one part that's worth honing on here too is for longer deal cycles, or you think those big enterprise deals. How can you look to see if your territory planning is working or your quota planning is working, knowing that it may be a 6, 9, 12, 18-month sales cycle?
So there are always journey metrics, milestones. It may take 18, 24 months to close a deal, but we would expect 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to be able to achieve certain objectives in terms of relationship building, proposal writing, responding back to customer requests and questions, overcoming objections, understanding what competitors are proposing. So for longer sales cycle situations, it would be very important to be able to establish some metrics along the way, through the journey, to be able to assess where one transaction stands relative to another and how those resources are being allocated.
I think that's great. And let's talk a little bit more about the territory planning itself, right? This is an art and a science. And we've got a revenue scientist on. So Martin, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, what are you seeing in your research about how teams are designing territories, especially as they scale in this world that we're in?
Okay, well, that's two different questions. Let's just talk about the design piece first, and then we'll talk about the scaling. For most businesses are scaling, say, from year to year with modest percentage change. Let me put it that way. And the reason why I try to separate the questions, because in the business to consumer space, the territory configuration and planning looks somewhat different than in the business to business space. Business to business space, particularly in financial services, technology, would be two good examples where markets are changing rapidly. Technology is changing rapidly. Competitors are entering markets frequently. Customer requirements are changing frequently. So there's the cycle of adaptation and adjustment is much more rapid, and it's going to be a bit more bottoms up because of the dynamics of the marketplace needing to be reflected in what's realistic, even though virtually every organization has some top-down financial objective to achieve. The rapid dynamics of the technology, financial services, and other related markets are the similar markets, really require a lot of on-the-ground knowledge. Business to consumer is a little different. Markets generally are a bit more mature. They're certainly larger. We may be talking about, in some cases, thousands of territories as opposed to hundreds. Because of the maturity, there are financial objectives that have been set, certainly for publicly held consumer brands that looking to be achieved. So it's much more top-down, much less flexibility. We're structuring the territories to achieve certain quotas that are tied to certain financial performance. So it differs, and the structure of the territory is going to differ.
So with that, one question that comes up when we talk about territories, and in the B2B world, are geo territories done? Martin, you used to own the Midwest, and there's your patch. Go, figure out where the restaurants are. Are you seeing that go away, or is that still kind of maybe going to happen?
Yeah, so the most recent research we've done, which actually has just been completed over the past month or so, a bit of a nuance. So I'm not going to answer yes or no. The nuance is geographic territories are still the most frequent and the most used, but even in a business to business context, industry territories and named accounts are almost as frequent. Mm-hmm. So what we see is not, I guess maybe a better way to answer your question, the old days of simply having a geographic set of territories is over. The current world combines geographic territories with a complex mix of industry and named account territories.
Interesting. Okay. I think that kind of makes sense intuitively, but it's one of those ones where I think folks are like, hold on, what? That's really awesome there. In terms of what you're seeing and feeling out there, how are the organizations feeling around kind of travel, right? Back to, if I've got a geography, what are you seeing from your research of people either traveling to that geography, or what customer expectations are around getting visited by, Martin, you're in town, you're going to pop by, we're going to have a meeting?
Yeah. So again, our most recent data suggests that return to travel is either already occurred or very quickly coming along. A large proportion of organizations that we've surveyed suggest that they either are at or will quickly be beyond 70% of the travel they did in 2019. Now, that's even if let's say you're at 70%, that still implies almost a 1/3 decline, a 1/3 less travel. Yeah. But nonetheless, we are, I think, rather rapidly returning to some of the personal in-person engagement that we've seen. Now, you're going to say to me, I know the airlines have said they don't have a lot of business travelers yet. So a couple of things. Of course, not everybody has to get on a plane to visit clients. So a lot of that is occurring that doesn't require necessarily a lot of plane travel just yet. And number two, we also seem to be hearing that budgets are going to be a bit more constrained. So we are returning to travel, but in perhaps measurably less of the travel, and then with measurably less spending as well.
It feels like the days of flying from, Chicago to Atlanta for a dinner meeting. Probably that's not coming back for a while, though.
Not unless it's very important.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Martin, we've got a couple of questions coming in here around back to what you were saying before around territory design and all that. You mentioned sort of a named accounts plus geography model. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say named accounts? Just give folks some first principles around that.
Sure. So most organizations have, in some instances, a few large clients, depending on the size, could be many large clients that deserve special attention and special focus. In some instances, those clients might be of sufficient size that it's not one person who's assigned to cover the account, but a team of folks. Again, depending upon the complexity of the offer, the product, the solution, there may be a sizable team that's necessary. And for the most part, we can imagine who some of those named accounts are. They're maybe draw an arbitrary line, the Fortune 50 or the Fortune 100. They're all brand names, household names. They're all large organizations. They have needs that are complex. And of course, they do substantial spending because of their size. And the ability to do business successfully with such large named accounts can be very important financially to many organizations, because they in turn, that business in turn is going to fund a lot of other growth opportunities for those providers, those vendors who are can successfully engage.
And just to put a fine point on this for folks, as Martin was mentioning, these are big, complex accounts that you're selling to. So an example of this may be like Turner, which owns CNN, and they do the broadcast for the NBA and Bleacher Report and probably a whole bunch of other properties. You may have one or two folks on a deal pod or a deal team working on that, but that's when Martin's talking about named accounts. That's like a real practical example. Amazon's another one, right? Amazon owns a whole bunch of companies under it.
Absolutely.
And one other question. This is a great question. Austin, good to see you on. Love having the question here. One of the things Austin wants to know is, well, hold on, why is geographic still kind of a part of these territories? What have you seen of why that kind of still matters?
Yeah, so we talked about named accounts and the special, unique, oftentimes requirements that large named accounts have. Then we have industry accounts, where industry knowledge, the knowledge of industry events, industry economics, the practices, the needs, the requirements that individual industries have, create a second group of clients. Oftentimes could be quite large, maybe not as large as a named account, but quite large. And then finally, there's typically oftentimes smaller accounts that do business regionally. And therefore have a lesser or reduced set of requirements and operate in say a more restricted geography. And that's a case where you might want to group together clients in a particular geography. The other consideration, though, on the other side of the ledger to think about this is when we have, for example, let's compare an industry account territory with a geographic territory. So an industry territory is likely to be spread out quite broadly. Let's take the US, spread across the US. So somebody, just to follow up with Austin's question, somebody may live in Austin, Texas, but be covering accounts in San Jose, California. So they're getting on a plane every week or every other week or once a month. That's expensive. And it certainly is justified depending upon the size of the business and the size of the opportunity. Whereas a geographic account, the cost of sales is less typically because we're not traveling as much. The time investment is perhaps not quite so great to make that sales call. So we just have to balance the requirements that exist in an industry and the unique requirements of that industry versus the cost and the cost of sales for serving.
It's a great point. And if you think of too, Martin, what you were saying before, there's a certain component of this that's going to stay virtual. Right. And so you've got this other vector to look at. If can you sell to, let's just imagine you're in ad sales and you sell to big media brands, right? That's coast. Can you do that successfully remotely? How much can you do remotely? Which is another vector to think about. Well, we've touched on kind of some first principles. We've talked a little bit about territory planning. Let's talk a little bit more about quotas. A lot of folks made changes to quotas, especially last year and into this year. Some folks went to MBOs, some folks went to activity-based metrics, some folks didn't change a dang thing. What are you seeing out there to the folks are setting from a quota perspective and how they're doing it?
So again, one of the most surprising results of our recent research is the answer is all of the above. My hypothesis going into this was the vast majority of respondents were going to say that it's either revenue, sales revenue, I have a certain dollar sales revenue quota to reach, or gross margin, depending upon the economics of the industry that you're representing with clients. But it turns out that volume metrics, as well as market share, are also used almost as frequently as the others. Now, as for those folks who know anything about research, you can't ask a lot of detailed questions on a survey like this. It may well be that there are, as you suggest, management by objectives or market share or even volume metrics that are maybe like a set of add-ons or part 2 or part 3 of the compensation plan. So whereas the primary objective might be sales revenue or gross margin, there are a subsequent set of potential rewards a seller can get for achieving some of those other goals as well. We don't have that level of detail, but at a high level, there are everything is used, all of the above.
And it feels like there will be some distinguishing between kind of goals that maybe you have to achieve and then a quota, right? That's kind of how maybe where the world goes.
Maybe a good way to put it. Sure.
Yeah, I think one of the other parts too about this, Martin, and I'd love your perspective on this. We're talking about quota, we're talking about territory planning, and we're dealing with sales reps at the end of the day and account managers. Any tips or advice for organizations as they roll out changes to these plans? Because it's always tricky with sellers, right?
Right. Well, the basic premise, go back to your first principles. The basic premise is nobody likes change, right? That's the point where I started around culture, right? Culture is what we do when nobody's looking, and we all tend to go back to a certain comfort zone, certain comfort level. And so consequently, when markets change, customers change, technology changes, and we need to have changes in how we do business, whether it's selling or otherwise, whatever the discipline, function, or profession is, change becomes very difficult. And in my mind, oftentimes the technology is the easier piece of it. It's the change management that's more difficult because there's always a great deal of reluctance on everybody's part to have to do something differently. And that's where the education, the training, the support, the incentives need to come into play to be able to create a program and a structure and an atmosphere that's supportive of change and change management. I put at the top of my list leadership.
Yeah.
We can see that without getting too controversial, we can see that in our politics around the world. Leaders, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, influence wide bodies of people. And no matter what organization you're in, if the leader is asking to do something, then the inclination is to try to follow. And so part of change management is also having the leadership involved and having the leadership set the direction for the change.
Well, and I think it's being back to that point on transparency as well. It's setting that vision, but also being upfront honest with reps. Our goal here is to make you economically successful to achieve the goals while also running a responsible business. And and having that be maybe even a first or second conversation, a hiring process. Make sure that you create the right organization that's going to be receptive to those changes.
Absolutely. I would say there's one certainty in life, and that is that nothing's going to stay certain.
I was going to say reps were going to complain about their territories quotas.
Well, that is another certainty, but change is a constant.
No, I love it. I love it, Martin. We got a live question coming in from Travis Henry. Hey, Travis, thanks for asking the question here. When thinking about not just territory design from an AE perspective, but thinking about things like maybe sales engineers or sales development reps, other folks that are kind of supporting, do you bake in modeling for them into the territory planning and quota process? Do you do a coverage ratio? Like, what have you seen work when you're tagging in specialists as part of the deal processes?
Yeah, certainly the specialists are very important. We all can't be experts in every topic, and we want our sellers, number one, to have skills around selling. Know how to sell, know how to influence, know how to build relationships, know how to close deals, know how to get the orders, and of course a great deal of the product knowledge is accumulated along the way, but the specialists then have the much deeper product knowledge, and oftentimes are not very good salespeople. So you bring those two sets of skills together, and it can be very successful. You really have to look very carefully at the level of support, number one, that the sellers require. And number two, the level of support that the specialist can provide. Is it one specialist to two sellers, or one specialist to five sellers? What is the ratio that works, not only in terms of time management and responding to opportunities that come along, but you also have to remember that because they're specialists, they tend to get pulled in a number of different directions oftentimes across wide geographies. So have to manage very carefully this very valuable resource and how it gets managed and matched with the seller capability. But in my view, it requires a lot of careful and close attention once the sales coverage territory is in place across the territories. Then how do we deploy the skilled resource in support? And there may be layers, right? There's maybe some specialists who have certain levels of knowledge, and others who have much deeper knowledge. So it really is a space that requires some very careful thought in terms of deploying that resource and being able to make use of it effectively.
And I think that just to paraphrase a few points that Martin made there, Travis, for especially with sales engineers, I think it's a capacity. What capacity do you need? Because they don't have infinite time to associate with every deal. They're doing deeper work. Something I've seen as a recovering sales engineering leader was that your sales engineering, assuming you had the right staffing and that capacity component worked out, was generally one iteration behind where the sales team was. If the sales team was East and West, the sales team was the sales engineering team was North America. And so that may work for you, Travis, but to Martin's point, it's important to really think about it from the capacity standpoint. How much can they do? How much should they do? And how frequently should they be tagging them in? Because you can burn those resources out, and they're typically higher priced than your account executives as well. So you can burn out this high priced resource much more quickly by not thinking about the capacity, as well as just the do we need to fold them into this process here? I think that's probably a whole separate session there. We're in like three-dimensional calculus with that one.
Absolutely, yes, but very important.
I think it's great. So Martin, I want to ask just a question that comes in quite a bit, and this is a good registration question as well. If you're kind of starting from scratch with this, what are some best practices or tips for folks that are just getting their territory modeling and their quota planning kind of set up and getting that going?
So of course, now it depends. When you say just getting it set up, the question is whether or not it's an existing organization that has some legacy and has some data, importantly,
Yeah.
or whether it's a new organization that's recently just launched. Two completely different situations. But for a legacy organization, being able to draw on the data that may have been accumulated over a period of quarters or years, it really is important. And the first step, in my view, really the territory, the deployment of sellers into territories, in my view, is really a third or a fourth step. And we need to begin by understanding our customers. What are the customer segments? How do we group customers together? Whether if it's a consumer market, are we doing this by geography? And within a given geography, are there some types of products or distributors or stores that are different than others? If it's a business to business market, are there some industries or locations that are different than others? So grouping customers into segments is step number one. Step number two is, what's the coverage model? How are we going to cover these clients? Not everybody's going to have a seller show up in person and make a call on them. Many, of course, transactions are occurring via the web, e-commerce transactions. And then, of course, many relationships are built through call centers. So being able to distinguish among buying habits, buying decisions, the size of the customer, where they fit across the various channels. Are they going to be covered by a distributor or a partner, through an e-commerce channel, through a call center, or through in-person coverage? Being able to segment, having the customers, segment them in terms of how you want to cover them with a coverage model, then drop down into the territory plan.
That's a great first principles there. And Martin, I want to ask kind of another question that's related to this. If we think of designing territories, when an AE leaves, or when I have to scale more quickly and I have to start to make some adjustments there, what are some common methods you've seen to manage that process of maybe scaling quicker than I needed to, or somebody leaves suddenly and their territory is kind of just there? What happens?
Well, the problem is that every business leader, CEO on down, wants to scale as quickly as possible. I'm going to give you incremental budget to add another channel or add more sellers or whatever the investment's going to be. And by the way, this starts next month. So how much revenue am I going to see next month, right? So part of the challenge is understanding, what's the ramp look like? How long does it take to build a relationship with a customer? How does that differ by different channel? It's not the same across every channel. Some are much more marketing driven. Some are much more in-person driven. Others are perhaps through building relationships with partners, good partners. So understanding what the ramp is, the ramp up is from a revenue perspective, and being realistic. Ultimately, it leads to disappointment and confusion and chaos if we assume there's going to be a lot of revenue generated quickly, right, and then of course it's not, and the whole effort is deemed a failure, and then you're in a situation where there's not enough sales coverage to be able to generate the results. You just create a chaotic situation. So it has to start with a realistic understanding of what the ramp time looks like. And we can talk more about what lengthens it or shortens it, but that is a major issue for many organizations.
I think that the old joke is in engineering, right? We had the mythical person month, right? Throw more engineers on it, and eventually it gets done faster. And it's like, I just hired 8 sellers. why hasn't the
Right.
revenue gone up, Martin? To
Exactly.
your point,
Exactly.
there's the
Right.
ramp on that. One piece that we haven't talked about too much, Martin, and I'd love your perspective on is like, this is getting this right can be very tricky. What is it, that technology can do to kind of help us at least design smarter territories and better, better quota and plans?
Well, I guess the way I look at it is there's the technology that we have available and have had available to us for some time, and the technology that's now becoming available. So we certainly have the kind of tools and capabilities that allow us to bring together universe of clients, be able to uh, move them into territories and allow us to then assess those territories in a much more efficient and automated fashion than has traditionally existed. We call it TQP, territory and quota planning. Increasingly, though, we have the ability to make use of the machine learning and artificial intelligence tools that allow us to be much more predictive around where success is going to be. There's sometimes a big mystery around artificial intelligence that's going to somehow take over the world. Well, it's actually pretty simple. The basic concept is pretty simple. It's a prediction tool. And the simplest example that I always use is that when you're on your phone and you're texting a message and the phone suggests to you the word that you're trying to type, oftentimes it's right. And more often than not, it's right. But that's a little machine learning algorithm that's been programmed into the phone that predicts the word you're trying to type. Well, it's the same concept when we're building territories. We can predict what territories are going to be successful, and then make adjustments to other territories to get the prediction of where success is going to be. So we have the technology tools that help us manage the process, and we have the artificial intelligence machine learning tools that help us to optimize the process.
And that's such an interesting point. We had on Tiffany Bova earlier in the week, and she was talking about like we're close to fulfilling. Tiffany Bova is head of innovation at Salesforce. She's a futurist. She's phenomenal. But she was talking about how we're at the point now where we kind of fulfilled the promise of we've got all this data, and now we've got solutions that can help us do more with it or be in work smarter about it.
Sure. Yeah, so we download Salesforce data once every 2 hours. So, and that allows us then to help our clients with the curation of the data to improve the quality of the data. And data will, certainly sales data will always be an issue or a problem, but there are important ways to be able to improve the quality, improve the usefulness, and then be able to get the benefits, whether it's in terms of territory and quota planning, or whether it's lead to revenue, sales forecasting, or opportunity assessment type work.
Awesome. I think it's exciting times. We've got Martin for a little bit longer, folks. I've got a bunch of questions to ask, but please do use the Q&A panel and throw anything that you're interested in covering there. As you can see, Martin can go broad, he can go deep on this. He's a valuable resource, so please let's take advantage of him. Martin, one question that came in a bunch during registration was about kind of the higher velocity sales environment. So think, much smaller deal size, faster sales cycle. Is anything different that we've talked about here in a high velocity world? Or are you just kind of looking at things maybe more frequently, or you have more data? Like, how does that change things?
Well, certainly in a high velocity world, depending upon how high the velocity is, in-person sales calls just are not feasible in most instances. And that's where the benefits of the web, e-commerce sites, and call center capabilities come into this. So again, going back to where I was a few minutes ago, understanding your customer segments, and then understanding how they're making buying decisions, and of course, in the context of the product, the sales cycle and the sales velocity is a critical element in that formula, if you will, in establishing the coverage model and making the investment in the sales infrastructure that organizations have to make.
And I think with that one too, to Martin's point, right, there's more to it than just what do we set the quotas at? It's how do you actually set the sellers up for success?
Absolutely.
Another one that you alluded to when we were talking about kind of the mythical seller dollar revenue, whatever the equivalent is of the mythical person months, what role does ramp time play into thinking about both designing quotas and designing territories?
Right. So you know, if you have customers that are going to require some ramp time, and I think of either brand new customers who maybe have never purchased your offering previously, or maybe competitive customers who are buying from a competitor. Making an investment in building that sales relationship takes time. It doesn't, for the most part, doesn't happen quickly, doesn't happen overnight. Can take a considerable period of time, depending upon the nature of the product, anywhere from a few months to measured in a couple of years, depending on how frequently or how often buying decisions are made. The problem with all of that is if you have every seller on the same compensation plan, anybody who's in a territory with new customers or competitive customers is going to go broke and die of starvation before they get to their first successful sale, right? So we have to recognize that number one, the territory structure may be different, the quota structure may be different, and the compensation structure will certainly be different. So depending upon how many new customers that we might want to engage with in a certain year, how many competitive customers, we might have to structure territories in a different way. Maybe everybody gets a little bit, or maybe there's just pure competitive territories. Different organizations have experience in different ways. And then thinking about what the quotas look like. And then of course there'll be difference between base salaries versus incentive compensation. You can't be 100% incentive compensated for somebody that's not going to buy anything. You know, have to have a much higher base salary. So my point is you really have to think across the entire chain of events, from territories to quotas to compensation, depending upon how long it takes to get to the ramp that you're talking about.
And I think that would be applicable too. We're not just talking about the seller getting up to speed on the domain and the product. It could also be product maturity. If we've got, you know, one product line that we've got the playbook for, and we've got another product line that you know, maybe it'll work. You would probably think about compensation and quotas and design very differently for those.
Sure. And if you have a mature product or mature offering and you recruit a seller that brings a book of business with him or her, you know, the ramp time is likely going to be less.
Yeah.
So that you're right. There's another set of considerations in terms of the individual circumstance.
No, totally. I think that's one that's often overlooked. Hey, Martin, we just opened up Asia Pacific and we're using the same quotas.
Right.
Why isn't anybody performing?
Right.
Well, that's actually an interesting point. I think that's also a question that comes up as we start to expand maybe outside of the US. Are there any maybe trends or things that you're seeing beyond just how things are done domestically for setting up domestic territories, or is it a lot of the same for overseas?
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's a lot of the same. Certainly North America, US in particular, but North America has generally seen quicker and faster adoption of e-commerce. So we'll see buying decisions being made in different ways. And of course, there are different languages, different customs, different cultures. And, you know, I hopefully nobody will misinterpret my remarks, but you can't send somebody from Belgium to cover folks from France, or it depends who it is. There's certain friction across different historic lines. I mean, just look what's happened with Brexit, from the exit of the UK from Europe, right? So all of those territories have to be restructured. So there are, you know, very unique circumstances. Same thing in Asia. We can go through a whole set of historic animosity among nations and with different languages and histories and cultures. So that's another dimension of it that we oftentimes don't see in a large market like the US, or even a large market like China, where we have a large domestic opportunity that can be managed in a quite different way. So different buying patterns, different buying decisions, different practices, business practices, different cultures, which differs substantially than what we see here in the U.S.
And I think just to bring that point home is, take all of that into consideration as you're designing the territories, you're designing the compensation model, as you're thinking through even who you hire for those experiences.
Yep.
So, Martin, we're almost at time here. So before we start to completely wrap, any key takeaways or things you want to leave our audience with here today? Best practices, tips, tricks, one last tidbit?
Well, the point that I was making a few moments ago in terms of don't think about planning territories as the first step. Think about it as a step that occurs after we understand who our customers are, how we segment our customers, how we want to cover our customers based on how buying decisions are being made, and then what the territories might look like. And keeping in mind that in many markets, how buying decisions are being made are changing and changing rapidly. Will probably look very different as a result of the pandemic, as we've all gotten used to doing business in a different way. So territory planning comes after a number of quite important early steps that have to be an area of focus. And then secondly, I guess I would say that we're on the verge of very significant, very fundamental change as to how this work is done. Not only do we have new and better technology, but the technology is even newer and getting better with the kind of capabilities that we're now rolling out around machine learning and artificial intelligence, all of which is resulting in much greater efficiency, much lower cost, and much more sales success as a result.
I love it, Martin. I really, every time that we get a chance to have you on, it's always amazing. This was no exception. On behalf of Taylor and the team behind the scenes, all the folks watching on YouTube in the future, and everybody who joined us here live today, I wanted to thank you for sharing your insights and sharing your time with us.
My pleasure.
Excellent. Well, Martin, stay safe. Enjoy your trip to Boston, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Absolutely. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.